I gave up all music for 30 days. The silence showed me what I was using it to hide. I want to tell you how I discovered I was afraid of my own commute, not the commute itself. 22 minutes on a train. Nothing dangerous, nothing difficult. But I had not done it without music in 4 years, not once. Headphones in before the door closed behind me, music playing before I reached the street, the specific playlist for the specific mood of the specific day. All of it automatic, all of it in place before I had consciously decided anything. I did not notice this was a pattern until the day I forgot my headphones. I stood on the platform. The train arrived. I sat down. And the silence landed on me with a weight I was completely unprepared for. Not peaceful, not refreshing, heavy, full of something I had apparently been successfully avoiding for 4 years without knowing I was avoiding anything. I got home that evening and designed the experiment. The thermostat. The average person listens to music for 4 to 5 hours per day, not as a primary activity, as a background to everything that might otherwise require you to simply be present with whatever you are thinking. The researchers call it emotional regulation, which sounds clinical but is accurate. Music regulates emotion the way a thermostat regulates temperature. It keeps the internal environment within a range that feels manageable. You are sad, you choose music that lifts you out of it. You are anxious, you choose music that narrows the anxiety into something with a beat you can follow. You are empty, you choose music that fills the emptiness with someone else's feeling. The thermostat works. That is not the problem. The problem is that a thermostat running constantly means you never find out what the actual temperature is. The first week, the commute on day 1 was the first data point. 22 minutes of unstructured time with my own thoughts. No input, no external emotional direction. Just me and whatever was already in my head when I boarded. What was in my head was not comfortable, not distressing, just the ordinary contents of a mind given space to surface. A conversation from 2 days ago I hadn't processed. A decision I'd been circling for weeks. A feeling I couldn't name that sat in my chest for the full 22 minutes and asked to be acknowledged rather than accompanied. By day 3, I had identified something specific I'd never articulated before. I used music as a pre-emotional filter. Before anything difficult, a hard day, a conversation I was dreading, I would choose music that told me how to feel about it. Not consciously, but specifically. The playlist for the difficult meeting. The album for the evening after disappointing news. The song for the moment when I needed to be okay before I was actually okay. The music was not reflecting my emotional state. It was manufacturing one. Day 5, cooking dinner in silence for the first time in years. The kitchen without a playlist felt enormous, full of the sound of the cooking itself, full of my own breathing, full of the specific quality of late evening that a room has when nobody is performing anything in it. I stood at the stove and felt the specific discomfort of being met by a moment, rather than passing through it. Day 7. I could not fall asleep. Without the music I used to fall asleep to, my mind had nothing to follow into unconsciousness. It had been using music as a hand to hold on the way down. Without it, it circled. It surfaced thoughts. It presented unfinished things. I lay in the dark and became aware of the texture of my own unaccompanied mind at the end of the day. It was louder than I expected, and more honest. What surfaced without the thermostat running, I was finding out what the actual temperature was. I used music most heavily in 3 specific situations. Transitions. Any movement between one state and another, leaving the house, finishing work, ending a social event, I would reach for music immediately, not because the transition was difficult, because transitions contain a moment of being between things, briefly undefined. Music filled that gap instantly. Without it, I had to actually cross the gap. Difficult emotions I didn't want to metabolize fully, not suppress, regulate. The difference between grief at full volume and grief with a soundtrack is significant. The soundtrack gives it shape, pace, a beginning and an end. Without music, the grief or the anxiety or the unnamed thing arrived shapeless and stayed as long as it needed to stay. And the one that surprised me most, thinking. I had been using music to prevent a specific kind of thinking, not all thinking, a particular variety of slow, uncomfortable thinking that requires no input, no stimulation, the kind that produces the things you most need to think and least want to arrive at. On day 11, I had the most productive 40 minutes of thinking I had experienced in recent memory. On a train, in silence, without deciding to think about anything in particular. What arrived was not comfortable. What arrived was necessary. Day 30. I put on an album I love, not as background. Sitting down, eyes closed, nothing else happening. It was the most completely I had listened to music in years, maybe ever. Background music had crowded out the other kind entirely. I had been listening to music constantly for 4 years and had not actually heard it once. What I know now. The thermostat works. It is not bad that it works. The question is whether you know what temperature you are actually running at. I was running it automatically. I did not know what the actual temperature was. I had not known for 4 years. What I found when I turned it off was not silence. It was the contents of my own unaccompanied mind, louder, more honest, less managed than I had realized. The anxieties, the unfinished thoughts, the unprocessed feelings, the specific variety of deep thinking that had been waiting patiently in every gap I kept filling. I listened to music now, deliberately, with attention, as an experience rather than an accompaniment. And sometimes, on the commute, in the kitchen, in the gap between one thing and the next, I leave the headphones in my pocket. Not as a practice, not as a discipline, just to find out what the temperature actually is.